The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stood silent for the first time in 3,000 years. Representatives from 10,000 worlds waited in their seats, watching the entrance with curious eyes. The Vidian prophets had requested an audience, and nobody could remember the last time these ancient beings had spoken to anyone. The doors opened with a soft hiss. 3 tall figures entered, their bodies covered in flowing robes that seemed to shift colors like oil on water. The Vidians moved slowly, their footsteps making no sound on the polished floor. Every eye in the chamber followed them as they approached the speaking platform at the center. Chancellor Mordok of the Zenthari Empire stood from his elevated seat. His forearms spread wide in the traditional gesture of welcome. "Honored prophets," he said, his voice echoing through the vast space. "It has been 10,000 standard years since your people last addressed this council. We are grateful for your presence." The lead Vidian stopped at the platform. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We come with a warning. A grave warning about a species that will soon join your empire." Murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives. Warnings were rare. The Vidians had seen civilizations rise and fall across millions of years. If they were concerned about something, it was worth hearing. "Show us," Chancellor Mordok said, settling back into his seat. The Vidian raised one long arm. The air above the platform shimmered and changed. An image appeared, showing a small blue and green planet orbiting a yellow star. "This world is called Earth by its inhabitants. The dominant species calls themselves humans." More murmurs. Several representatives checked their data tablets, pulling up information about the planet. It was in a quiet corner of the galaxy, barely worth noticing. The species living there had not even achieved faster-than-light travel yet. "These humans," the Vidian continued, "are different from any species you have encountered. They are dangerous in ways you cannot imagine." A delegate from the Crixian collective stood up, his scales rattling with amusement. "Forgive me, honored prophet, but we have reviewed the data on this species. They are primitive. They fight among themselves constantly. They poison their own planet. They have barely left their homeworld. What danger could they possibly pose to an empire of 10,000 species?" The Vidian turned to face the Crixian. "That is precisely why they are dangerous. You see their division and think them weak. You see their struggles and think them primitive. You do not understand what those struggles have created." The image changed, showing scenes from Earth. Humans climbing the highest mountains in terrible weather. Humans diving into the deepest oceans where the pressure should crush them. Humans racing across burning deserts and frozen wastelands. Humans building cities, making art, exploring caves, jumping from flying machines for entertainment. "Every other species in this galaxy evolved on worlds that welcomed them," the Vidian said. "Worlds with gentle weather, abundant food, and few predators. Your evolution was a peaceful process. But Earth?" The images showed massive storms, erupting volcanoes, prowling predators with enormous teeth. Earth tried to kill them. Every single day for millions of years, their planet tried to kill them. And they refused to die. Another delegate spoke up, a floating Quelon whose body rippled with light. "Many species face challenges during evolution. This is not unique." "You misunderstand," the Vidian replied. "Other species adapted to their environments. Humans adapted their environment to them. When they could not survive the cold, they did not grow fur. They killed other animals and wore their skins. When they could not digest certain foods, they did not develop new stomachs. They discovered fire and cooked the food until they could eat it. When predators hunted them, they did not grow claws or fangs. They made weapons." The Chancellor leaned forward. "Are you saying they are violent?" "We are saying they are persistent," the Vidian answered. "Violence is merely one tool in their collection. They have others that are far more concerning." The images changed again, showing human families, human friends, humans caring for animals. They form bonds with anything. They adopt their predators as companions and call them pets. They weep for creatures that cannot possibly understand their emotions. They will fight to the death to protect beings they met only days before. This emotional capacity makes them unpredictable and extremely dangerous when protecting those they consider theirs. They also refuse to accept impossibility, the Vidian continued. When their scientists say something cannot be done, they find another scientist who will try anyway. When they face a problem with no solution, they create a new solution. They have a saying on their world, "That's not a bug, it's a feature." They take their flaws and turn them into advantages. The council chamber filled with skeptical whispers. This all seemed like exaggeration. The Vidians were old, perhaps too old, Maybe they had finally lost their edge. Chancellor Mordock raised a hand for silence. Honored prophets, we appreciate your concern. But the Empire has successfully integrated 10,000 species. We have protocols, procedures, and safeguards. Whatever unique qualities these humans possess, we are confident we can manage them appropriately. The Vidian stood silent for a long moment. We have observed humans carefully for 50,000 of your standard years. We have seen them go from primitive tribes to a spacefaring civilization. We have watched them split the atom, cure diseases, and send machines to other worlds, all while fighting among themselves. Imagine what they will accomplish when they finally unite against an external challenge. You say you can manage them, the Vidian continued, its voice growing softer and somehow more ominous. But you cannot manage a force of nature. You cannot negotiate with a tide. You can only prepare for it or be swept away by it. The Chancellor stood again, his posture stiff with barely concealed irritation. Your warning is noted and will be recorded in the official archives. The Council will take appropriate precautions when first contact is established. Is there anything else? The three Vidians turned toward the exit. As they reached the doors, the lead prophet stopped and looked back. Yes, one more thing. When the humans arrive, and they will arrive, remember this moment. Remember that we warned you. And know that everything we told you today was an understatement. We could not find words in any language to truly express what humans are capable of. You will simply have to see for yourselves. The doors closed behind them with a soft whisper. The council chamber erupted in conversation. Most delegates dismissed the warning as the paranoid ravings of an ancient species losing its grip on reality. Some made jokes about being afraid of primitives who still used chemical rockets. A few took notes, but even they were not particularly worried. Chancellor Mordock filed the warning in the archives under Historical Curiosities and moved on to the next item on the agenda. 50 light-years away, on a small blue planet, humanity continued its slow, relentless march toward the stars. They did not know they had been discussed. They did not know they had been warned about. They simply did what humans had always done. They survived. They adapted. They reached for the impossible, and they prepared to show the galaxy what that really meant. 50 years had passed since the Vidian warning. The Council had long forgotten about it, buried under mountains of more pressing concerns. Now finally, Earth had achieved the milestone that brought them to galactic attention. A human ship had crossed into faster-than-light speed. The diplomatic vessel, Universal Harmony, entered Earth's solar system on a Tuesday morning. Its arrival was detected immediately by every human sensor array in the system. Within minutes, every screen on Earth showed the same image. A massive ship, 3 kilometers long, hovering just beyond the moon's orbit. Captain Velor of the Xanthari delegation stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the primitive satellites and space stations scrambling into defensive positions. It was adorable, really. These humans had weapons that could barely scratch his ship's paint. Still, protocols were protocols. He opened a communication channel. People of Earth, he said in carefully prepared English, we come in peace. We are representatives of the Galactic Empire, a union of 10,000 civilized worlds. We welcome you to the greater community of intelligent species. The response took 3 minutes to arrive. Galactic Empire, this is Secretary General Martinez of the United Earth Council. We welcome you. We have so many questions. Velor allowed himself a small smile. They always had questions. All will be answered in time. We request permission to establish an embassy in your capital city and begin formal first contact procedures. What followed was 3 months of careful negotiation. The humans, to Velor's surprise, were remarkably organized considering they had been fighting among themselves just decades earlier. They had somehow formed a unified world government specifically to handle this situation. Impressive for such a young species. The formal first contact ceremony took place in Geneva. Thousands of humans gathered outside the building, waving flags and holding signs. Some signs said, "Welcome, friends." Others said, "Don't eat us." Velor found their humor strange but harmless. Inside, Secretary General Martinez sat across from him at a long table. The human looked tired but excited. Captain Velor, on behalf of humanity, I want to thank you for this opportunity. We understand that joining the Galactic Empire is a significant step. Indeed, Velor replied, sliding a data tablet across the table. This is the standard integration package. We offer you access to basic medical technology, agricultural improvements, and limited faster-than-light travel capabilities. In exchange, you will accept junior membership status in the Empire, follow our laws and customs, and accept settlement rights on designated colony worlds. Martinez read through the document carefully. Too carefully, Velor thought. The human's eyes narrowed at certain sections. These colony worlds you mention, they're listed as frontier regions and challenging environments. Could you elaborate? They are perfectly adequate for settlement, Velor said smoothly. All junior species begin with such worlds. As you prove your capability and dedication to the Empire, better opportunities become available. I see. Martinez made some notes on his own tablet. And this clause about technology restrictions. We're prohibited from developing certain technologies independently, standard procedure. We cannot have new species accidentally harming themselves or others with advanced technology they don't understand. The Empire provides what you need when you need it. Martinez looked up. What if we disagree with that assessment? What if we want to research something you've restricted? Velor felt a flicker of annoyance. Then you would be violating the agreement and face sanctions. Secretary General, I understand this may seem limiting, but every species goes through this process. It's for your own protection. The human sat back in his chair thinking. Velor had seen this moment before. The realization that joining the Empire meant giving up independence. Some species balked at this point, but they always came around. The benefits were simply too good to refuse. We'll need to discuss this with our people, Martinez said finally. This is a decision for all humanity, not just me. 3 weeks later, humanity accepted the agreement. Velor was pleased but not surprised. They were rational enough to see the obvious choice. What happened next, however, was not in any protocol manual Velor had ever read. Within 6 months, human corporations had established trade relationships with 17 different alien species. They did this by finding loopholes in the technology restriction clauses, offering consulting services and cultural exchange programs that skirted the edges of the rules without quite breaking them. Human engineers appeared at construction sites across the galaxy, offering to work for lower wages than established species. Once hired, they watched everything, learned everything, and asked endless questions. Within a year, human-owned companies were building their own versions of alien technology, different enough to avoid patent violations but functional enough to undercut the competition. Human scientists published papers that challenged established theories. Most were wrong, but a few were disturbingly right. They approached problems from angles that no other species had considered, often because those angles were considered inefficient or inelegant by galactic standards. Humans didn't care about elegance. They cared about results. Velor started receiving complaints. The Crixian Collective objected to human traders using aggressive negotiation tactics. The Quellan Harmony protested human entertainment broadcasts that contained excessive emotional content. Thanix Republic complained that human tourists kept trying to pet their war beasts. They're disruptive, a Crixian delegate told him during an emergency meeting. They don't follow the established social norms. They ask inappropriate questions. They challenge authorities. They need to be controlled, Velor sighed. They're young. They'll learn to conform in time. All species do. But months turned into years and humans didn't conform. They spread through the galaxy like water finding cracks in stone. They became merchants, pilots, engineers, soldiers, doctors, and explorers. They opened restaurants serving strange earth foods. They started bands that played wild music. They formed friendships with species that had barely tolerated each other for centuries. And they explored. Oh, how they explored. Human ships ventured into nebulae that were considered too dangerous. They mapped asteroid fields that other species avoided. They established research stations in locations that made experienced spacers nervous. When asked why they took such risks, humans always gave the same answer. Because it's there. Velor watched a human cargo ship navigate through the Razor Field, an asteroid cluster that had destroyed dozens of ships over the centuries. The human pilot, a woman named Chen, threaded through the massive rocks with casual confidence, humming some Earth song while her co-pilot ate a sandwich. Aren't you concerned about the danger? Velor asked over the communication channel. Chen laughed. Captain, my grandmother drove a school bus through downtown Beijing during rush hour for 30 years. That was dangerous. This is just flying through some rocks. The ship emerged on the other side without a scratch. Jen had cut 3 hours off the normal travel time by taking the direct route. Reports from across the Empire told similar stories. Humans doing things that should be impossible or inadvisable, and somehow making them work. They had a phrase they used constantly: "Hold my beer and watch this." Valor had researched beer. It was a mild intoxicant. He could not understand why humans wanted someone to hold it while they attempted dangerous activities. 10 years after first contact, Valor sat in his office reviewing the integration report. By every official metric, humanity was succeeding. They had established colonies on 12 worlds, contributed to the economy, and followed most of the important rules. But something felt wrong. Humans were changing the galaxy around them in subtle ways. Other species were starting to adopt human customs. He'd seen a Thanix merchant using a human negotiation tactic last week. A Krellon had asked him what thinking outside the box meant. Even his own crew members had started drinking coffee, a human beverage that Valor found unbearably bitter. His terminal chimed. Another complaint from the border regions. Human explorers had made contact with the Khazar Dominion, the Empire's oldest and most dangerous enemy. The humans had apparently tried to establish diplomatic relations without authorization. Valor put his head in his hands. He was starting to understand why the Vidians had warned the Council, not because humans were aggressive or violent, though they could be both, but because they were like a stone dropped in still water, creating ripples that spread far beyond their size. The Empire had integrated 10,000 species successfully. But those species had all wanted to join a system and follow its rules. Humans seemed to want to join the system and then immediately start redesigning it. Outside his window, a human freighter passed by, its hull decorated with bright colors and strange symbols. Music blasted from its communication array, something about "Don't stop believing." The ship performed an entirely unnecessary barrel roll before entering the jump point. Valor decided not to file a complaint about the unnecessary maneuver. He was learning to pick his battles. Somewhere in the depths of space, the Vidian prophets watched and waited. The humans were performing exactly as predicted. The real test would come soon enough. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity could really do. 15 years after first contact, the Galactic Empire was discovering that having humans around was like living with a force of nature, useful, unpredictable, and occasionally terrifying. Commander Thex of the Imperial Guard stood in the briefing room, staring at the report in disbelief. They did what? Lieutenant Mora, a patient Kelon who had developed a stress disorder from dealing with human-related incidents, rippled through 3 different colors before responding. The human mining crew on Asteroid Base 7 discovered that the asteroid contained valuable crystals. However, the crystals were buried under 200 meters of solid rock. Standard procedure would be to abandon the operation or spend 6 months carefully drilling. And, Thex prompted, though he already suspected where this was going. They strapped 17 mining charges to the asteroid, evacuated to a safe distance, and blew up the entire northern hemisphere. The crystals were then easily accessible in the debris field. Thex closed his eyes. Did anyone die? No, sir. Remarkably, their calculations were perfect. They even managed to redirect the debris field away from the base. They collected 3 times the expected yield in 1/10 of the time. So they succeeded. Yes, sir. And now every mining operation in the sector is asking why we don't use the same method. This was happening everywhere. Humans would encounter a problem, ignore the established solution, and create something new that was either brilliant or insane or both. The worst part was that it usually worked. Thex had been tracking human integration carefully. What he saw both impressed and concerned him. Humans had spread through the Empire faster than any species in recorded history. They were everywhere, doing everything and changing everything they touched. In the medical field, human doctors had revolutionized trauma care. They came from a world where people regularly hurt themselves in spectacular ways, so they had extensive experience with emergency medicine. Dr. Sarah Chen had saved a Thanix diplomat's life using a procedure she called creative improvisation with available materials. The Thanix Medical Board had tried to discipline her for not following proper protocols, until they realized her patient would have died using those protocols. Human engineers were worse. They looked at machines designed by species with millions of years of advancement and said, "That's nice, but have you tried turning it off and on again?" Even more frustrating, this actually fixed problems. About 30% of the time, a human named Rodriguez had caused a galaxy-wide scandal by fixing a Crixian dreadnought's propulsion system with what he called duct tape and optimism. The Crixian engineers were horrified. The duct tape worked for 3 months before they finally replaced it with proper materials. Then there were the human traders. They had learned galactic economics in record time and immediately started breaking all the unwritten rules. They would trade with anyone, including species that other civilizations avoided. They established routes through dangerous space because it was faster. They negotiated deals that technically followed the law while completely ignoring its spirit. But what really concerned Thex was the social impact. Humans made friends with everyone. They didn't care about the ancient grudges between species. They didn't respect the careful social hierarchies that kept the empire stable. They just walked up to anyone and started conversations. A human bartender named Jack had opened an establishment on Station Gamma 9 called the Watering Hole. Within 6 months, it had become the most popular location on the station. Species that had refused to speak to each other for centuries were now sitting at the same bar, drinking Earth alcohol, and arguing about something called sports teams. Thex had visited the establishment personally to investigate. Jack had greeted him warmly, offered him something called whiskey, and spent the evening telling him stories about Earth. The stories were ridiculous. Humans jumping out of perfectly functional aircraft for entertainment. Humans climbing mountains because they wanted to. Humans racing vehicles at dangerous speeds for fun. We like challenges, Jack had explained, pouring another drink. We get bored easy. If life isn't exciting, we make it exciting. Thex had left the bar 3 hours later, slightly intoxicated and deeply troubled. He was starting to understand the Vidian warning. Humans weren't dangerous because they were aggressive. They were dangerous because they were contagious. The report on his desk proved it. Over the past 5 years, applications to join human-style exploration teams had increased by 400%. Young aliens from species that had been peaceful and cautious for millions of years were suddenly volunteering for dangerous missions. They wanted adventure. They wanted excitement. They wanted to boldly go where no one has gone before, a human phrase that had become annoyingly popular. Even more concerning were the military reports. Human mercenaries had become highly sought after. Despite their relatively weak physical capabilities, they had something other species lacked: tactical creativity. A Thanix general had hired a human military consultant named Colonel Martinez for a training exercise. Martinez had taken one look at the established battle formations and asked, "Why do you line up in neat rows where the enemy can shoot you easily?" The Thanix had explained that this was how civilized species conducted warfare. Martinez had responded, "That's stupid," and taught them something called guerrilla tactics. The Thanix military board was still arguing about whether these tactics were honorable. Meanwhile, their win rate in training exercises had increased by 60%. Thex reviewed incident reports from across the Empire. A human explorer had made first contact with a previously unknown species by landing on their planet and offering them something called pizza. Against all diplomatic protocols, it had worked. The new species loved pizza and were now applying for Empire membership. A human engineer had solved a 40-year-old problem with the station's waste recycling system by asking, "Have you tried reversing the polarity?" Nobody knew what polarity had to do with waste management, but the system now worked better than ever. A human pilot had saved a diplomatic convoy from pirates by flying through a plasma storm that was supposed to be impossible to navigate. When asked how she did it, she had shrugged and said, "I grew up in Florida. I've driven through worse storms to get to work." The message was clear. Humans looked at rules, regulations, and established procedures as suggestions rather than laws. They respected danger but didn't fear it. They faced impossible situations and refused to accept that they were impossible. Thex's terminal chimed with an incoming message. It was from Station Command. A human ship had requested permission to mount an expedition to the Void Sector, a region of space that was officially designated as forbidden. 300 ships had entered the Void Sector over the past millennium. None had returned. The human captain, a woman named Reeves, was arguing that modern scanning technology had advanced enough to make exploration safe. Her argument was technically correct, but every experienced spacer knew the Void Sector was wrong somehow. Ships didn't just malfunction there. They vanished without even a distress call. Thex reviewed Captain Reeves's file. She had 17 years of exploration experience, mostly in dangerous regions. Her crew was mixed, humans and aliens working together. They had discovered 12 new systems and established first contact with 3 species. Their safety record was actually better than average, despite taking risks that made seasoned captains nervous. The regulations were clear. Thex should deny the request. The void sector was forbidden for good reason, but he found himself hesitating. If anyone could survive the void and return with answers, it would be humans. They had already accomplished things that should have been impossible. He approved the request with conditions. Full sensor recording, regular check-ins, and a rescue fleet on standby. Captain Reeves accepted without hesitation. 3 weeks later, her ship returned from the void. They had found the source of the disappearances, a natural phenomenon that interfered with faster-than-light drives in a specific way. Ships had been accidentally jumping into a nearby star. Captain Reeves had mapped safe routes through the sector and discovered 7 habitable planets on the other side. The report concluded with a cheerful note. The void sector should really be renamed. It's not that scary once you know what you're doing. Thex put his head down on his desk. This was only 15 years. Humanity had been part of the Empire for only 15 years, and they were already reshaping it. What would the galaxy look like in 50 years? In 100? His terminal chimed again. Another incident report. A human had tried to pet a Khazar war beast. The beast, a creature bred for centuries to be an unstoppable killing machine, had apparently licked the human's face and then followed her around for 3 hours. The Khazar were demanding an explanation. Thex had none to give. Humans seemed to have a supernatural ability to befriend anything, even creatures that should rightfully eat them. He thought about the Vidian warning again. They had said humans were dangerous. They had said humans were inevitable. They had said the Empire couldn't manage them. Looking at the mountain of reports on his desk, Thex was starting to think the Vidians had understated the problem. Humans weren't just changing the Empire. They were teaching it to be human. And the galaxy would never be the same. The attack came without warning on a quiet morning in the border sectors. Admiral Karath was reviewing supply reports when every alarm on the flagship bridge started screaming at once. "Report!" she shouted, her wings snapping open in instinctive combat readiness. Multiple hostile contacts dropping out of jump space, her sensor officer called out. Khazar Dominion signatures. At least 40 capital ships. "They're opening fire!" Karath's blood turned cold. The Khazar Dominion had been the Empire's enemy for 3,000 years. They were brutal, efficient, and patient. If they were attacking now, it meant they had found an advantage. "Raise shields! Return fire! Send distress signals to all nearby fleets." The flagship shuddered as weapons fire struck its shields. Karath watched her tactical display with growing horror. The Khazar ships were using some kind of new weapon. Every time it fired, it created a pulse that disrupted the Empire's standard shield technology. Her fleet's defenses were failing. Shields at 40%, the engineering officer reported. "Whatever they're using, it's bypassing our primary systems." Across the border sectors, the same scene played out on dozens of worlds. The Khazar had clearly been planning this attack for years. They struck simultaneously at 15 critical locations, overwhelming the Empire's defenses with their new weapon technology. Within 6 hours, the Empire had lost 12 fleets and 4 colonies. Within 12 hours, the Council was in emergency session. Within 24 hours, every species in the Empire was asking the same question. How do we fight something that makes our shields useless? The answer came from an unexpected source. Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel, Defiant Spirit, had been in the Outer Rim when the attack began. She had received the distress calls and immediately redirected her ship toward the nearest battle. Her crew of 40 humans and 20 aliens from various species prepared for combat. "Captain, the briefing says the Khazar weapon disrupts standard energy shields," her first officer said. "We don't have any special protection against that." Chen smiled grimly. "No, we don't, but we've got something they might not expect. Prepare the kinetic weapons." Her first officer blinked. "The what?" "You mean those primitive projectile launchers we keep in storage?" "Those exact same primitive projectile launchers," Chen confirmed. "If their weapon disrupts energy shields, let's see how they handle a few tons of metal moving at high velocity." The defiant spirit entered the combat zone to find an Imperial fleet in full retreat. 3 massive Khazar dreadnoughts were pursuing, their new weapons systematically destroying every ship they encountered. Chen's ship was tiny compared to them, barely worthy of notice. "All weapons target the lead dreadnought," Chen ordered. "Fire everything we've got." The kinetic cannons roared to life. Solid metal projectiles launched at incredible speeds, too fast for the Khazar to effectively track. The rounds punched through their shields, which were designed to stop energy weapons, not physical objects. Armor plates buckled. Hull breaches appeared. The dreadnought's engines exploded. The other 2 Khazar ships turned their attention to this annoying small vessel. Chen's ship dodged and weaved through space with maneuvers that made her alien crew members feel sick. She flew like she was driving through Earth traffic, not commanding a starship. "They're targeting us." "Brace for impact," the tactical officer shouted. "Not today," Chen muttered. She fired the maneuvering thrusters in a pattern that should have torn the ship apart. Instead, it slipped between 2 incoming shots and returned fire with everything it had. Another Khazar ship took damage. Then something unexpected happened. A Thanix battlecruiser that had been retreating suddenly stopped. Its captain watched the human ship and made a decision. "All ships follow the human's lead. Switch to kinetic weapons, physical projectiles." Other ships in the fleet responded. Missiles, railguns, and any weapon that fired actual matter instead of energy beams. The Khazar ships, designed to counter modern energy weapons, found themselves vulnerable to technology that most species considered obsolete. The tide of battle shifted. The Khazar ships retreated not because they were defeated, but because they encountered something they hadn't prepared for, an enemy that fought dirty. News of the tactics spread through military channels at the speed of light. Human ships and human crews were suddenly in high demand, and humans, being humans, had opinions about how the war should be fought. Commander Marcus Webb stood in front of a room full of alien military officers. He was not impressed with what he saw. These officers had trained for centuries in proper military doctrine. They understood formations, supply lines, and honorable combat. They did not understand war the way humans understood it. "Your formations are too predictable," Webb said bluntly, pointing at the tactical display. "You line up, they line up, you shoot at each other until somebody retreats. That's not war. That's a sporting match." A Zenthari admiral bristled. "We follow established military protocol. These tactics have been refined over millennia." "Yeah, and the Khazar know all of them," Webb shot back. "They've been fighting you for 3,000 years. They know exactly what you're going to do. We need to do things they don't expect." "Such as?" another officer asked skeptically. Webb grinned. "Such as guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, false retreats, psychological warfare, hacking their communications, setting traps, fighting in ways that make them uncomfortable." The room erupted in protest. These tactics were dishonorable. They were beneath civilized species. They were not how proper warfare was conducted. Webb waited for the noise to die down. "Let me tell you about Earth. We had a war that lasted 6 years and killed 70 million people. We used every dirty trick we could think of. Propaganda, sabotage, code breaking, fake information. We even dropped the sun on 2 cities. We learned that when survival is on the line, honor is a luxury you can't afford." The room fell silent. Finally, a young Kellen officer spoke up. "Teach us," and they did. Human military advisors spread through the Empire's forces, teaching tactics that made traditional officers uncomfortable. They taught soldiers to question orders if those orders were stupid. They taught pilots to fly in ways that looked chaotic, but were actually carefully calculated. They taught engineers to jury-rig equipment in creative ways. Most importantly, they taught aliens something humans learned millions of years ago. When something wants to kill you, you fight back with everything you have. 3 months into the war, a mixed human-alien strike force executed what would later be called the Aldebaran mission. The Khazar had captured the colony of Aldebaran, a peaceful research station with 2,000 civilians. The Empire's strategy was to negotiate for their release through diplomatic channels. The humans had a different idea. Lieutenant Maria Santos led a team of 20 soldiers, half human and half Thanix, in a stealth insertion to the captured station. They bypassed security by crawling through maintenance tunnels that the Khazar didn't know existed. They avoided patrols by using thermal camouflage that humans had developed for hunting on Earth. They reached the civilians without firing a shot. Then things went wrong. A Khazar patrol discovered them during the extraction. The mission commander ordered retreat. Santos refused. "We don't leave people behind," she said simply. She held off the Khazar patrol while her team evacuated the civilians. When her Thanic squadmate was injured, she carried him to safety while still firing her weapon. When her ammunition ran out, she used a chair as a melee weapon. She died holding a doorway that let 17 civilians escape. Her Thanic squadmate survived and told the story. "She knew she would die," he said, his voice filled with something between grief and awe. "She knew and she stayed anyway." She said that's what humans do. The story spread through the military like wildfire. "Remember Aldebaran" became a battle cry, but it meant something different to different species. To traditional military officers, it was a reminder that some things were worth dying for. To the soldiers who fought alongside humans, it was a reminder that humans would die for you if you were their friend. And that was the thing that terrified the Khazar most. They were facing an enemy that made friends with everyone and would fight to the death for those friends. Every species that served alongside humans started fighting like humans. The cautious became bold. The peaceful became fierce. The civilized became savage when their friends were threatened. 6 months into the war, the Khazar began withdrawing from contested systems. Not because they were losing, but because they were facing something they had never encountered before. An enemy that refused to accept defeat and somehow convinced everyone else to do the same. A captured Khazar officer was interrogated about the withdrawal. "Why are you retreating?" the interrogator asked. The Khazar looked tired. "Because you brought humans into this war, and humans make everything impossible. They don't follow rules. They don't accept defeat. They turn every species they encounter into more humans. We can defeat the Empire. We cannot defeat an empire that fights like humans." The war wasn't over, but something fundamental had changed. The galaxy was learning to fight dirty, and humanity was teaching them how. The war ended not with a grand battle, but with a negotiation. The Khazar Dominion requested peace talks after losing 3 major engagements to forces using human tactics. The Empire agreed, grateful to end a conflict that had cost millions of lives. Chancellor Mordock sat in his office after the treaty signing, reviewing reports about humanity's impact on the war effort. The numbers were staggering. Human casualties had been relatively low, but their influence had been everywhere. They had trained thousands of soldiers, designed new tactics, and somehow convinced half the galaxy to fight like Earth warriors. More concerning were the cultural reports. Human music was now the most popular entertainment across the Empire. Human foods were available on every major station. Human phrases had entered dozens of alien languages. Young aliens were wearing Earth fashion, watching Earth shows and adopting Earth attitudes. A soft chime announced a visitor. Mordock was surprised to see 3 robed figures materialize in his office. The Vidian prophets had not been seen since their warning 70 years ago. "Honored prophets," Mordock said, standing and bowing, "you return to us." "We return to say what you already know," the lead Vidian replied. "We told you, but you did not listen." Mordock felt shame burn through him. "You were correct. Humanity has changed the Empire in ways we never anticipated. We were arrogant to dismiss your warning." "You misunderstand," the Vidian said, and there was something in its voice that might have been amusement. "We did not warn you that humans were strong. We did not warn you that they were clever. We warned you that they were inevitable." Before Mordock could respond, another chime announced an emergency council session. The prophets followed him to the great chamber, where representatives from all the major species had gathered. The HFY chamber looked different than it had 70 years ago. Half the delegates wore items of Earth clothing. Several were drinking coffee from Earth-style cups. 2 were arguing about something called football teams. The formal atmosphere that had defined the council for millennia had been replaced by something more casual, more energetic, more human. Mordock called the session to order. "The council has gathered to discuss the future of humanity's role in the Empire. The war has ended, but questions remain about how we proceed. Many species have expressed concerns about human influence on our culture and traditions." A Crixian delegate stood. "The humans have been useful, yes, but they are too disruptive, too unpredictable. I propose we return them to junior status and restrict their movement to their designated colonies." Murmurs of agreement from some delegates, but not as many as there would have been 20 years ago. A Thanic's general stood up, his scales colored in anger. I object. The humans saved us. They taught us how to fight when we had forgotten. They died alongside our soldiers. You want to repay that by restricting them? They died because they don't value their lives properly, the Crixian argued. They take unnecessary risks. They encourage others to do the same. They take calculated risks, a Kellan scientist interjected. I have studied their methods. What appears reckless is often carefully planned. They simply have a different threshold for acceptable danger. The debate continued for hours. Some argued for restrictions. Others argued for expansion of human rights. The council was more divided than it had been in centuries. Finally, a young delegate from a species that had barely spoken in council history stood up. If I may, the delegate said nervously. I am from the Porin Collective. We are a small species. We have always been afraid of war, afraid of danger, afraid of the unknown. But we have humans in our colony now. They are teachers there. The delegate paused, gathering courage. My daughter asked me yesterday why she should be afraid of trying new things. She said her human teacher told her that the only way to discover what you can do is to attempt what you think you cannot do. My daughter is 5 years old and she is already braver than I have ever been. Is this disruption? Yes. Is it bad? I do not think so. The chamber fell silent. Mordock looked around at the assembled delegates and realized something profound. The vote on human status didn't matter anymore. Humanity had already won. Not through conquest or force, but through something far more powerful. Inspiration. The Vidian prophet spoke for the first time. You still do not understand what we warned you about. You think humans are a species? They are not. Humanity is an idea. The idea that anything is possible if you try hard enough. The idea that the only limits are the ones you accept. The idea that standing up for your friends is more important than following rules. The prophet gestured around the chamber. Look at yourselves. You argue more than you used to. You question authority more. You take more risks. You dream bigger dreams. That is not because humans forced you to change. It is because you saw what humans accomplished and thought, perhaps I can do that too. Another delegate stood, this one from a species known for careful deliberation. So what do we do? How do we manage this? You cannot manage a forest fire, the Vidian said. You can only decide whether to flee from it or use it to clear away the old growth so new things can flourish. Humanity is your fire. They will burn away your comfortable traditions, your safe assumptions, your careful limitations. What grows afterward will be stronger, but also different. Mordock looked at the ancient being. What would you have us do? Accept the inevitable, the Vidian replied. Humanity has already spread too far to contain. You have 3 choices. Attempt to suppress them and face rebellion from the thousands of species they have befriended. Exile them and watch as half your empire follows them. Or embrace them and hope you can guide the changes they bring. The vote, when it came, was closer than Mordock expected, but the result was clear. Humanity would receive full Empire membership and a permanent seat on the Council, not because the Council wanted to give it to them, but because they had no realistic alternative. Ambassador Jennifer Park became the first human to take a Council seat. She was young by diplomatic standards, only 42 years old. She walked to her position wearing a formal suit jacket over jeans and earth boots. Several delegates were scandalized. Several others thought it looked practical. Thank you for this honor, Park said simply. Humanity pledges to serve the Empire to the best of our abilities. We'll probably mess things up sometimes. We're good at that. But we'll always try to make things better. It was the least formal acceptance speech in Council history. It was also the most honest. After the ceremony, Mordock found himself standing next to the Vidian prophet. You said humanity was inevitable, he said quietly. But you also said we couldn't manage them. How do we survive what comes next? The prophet was silent for a long moment. Do you know why we warned you? It finally asked. To protect the Empire? No. We warned you because we saw this moment coming. We knew humanity would join the Empire. We knew they would change it. We wanted you to be prepared. The prophet turned to look at him with ancient eyes. But there is something else we did not tell you in our warning. What? We have observed humanity for 50,000 years. We have watched them grow from primitives who feared fire to a spacefaring civilization. We have seen them face extinction a dozen times and survive. We have studied thousands of species across millions of years, and we have learned something important. The prophet paused. Every great civilization eventually stagnates. They become comfortable, risk-averse, and stagnant. They stop growing. They stop dreaming. They maintain what they have until some external force destroys them. Your empire was approaching that point. You were safe, secure, and slowly dying. Mordok felt a chill. You're saying we needed humans? We are saying the galaxy needed humans, the prophet corrected. You will change because of them. You will become uncomfortable, unstable, and dynamic. Many will not like it. But your civilization will grow again. It will dream again. It will reach for things it thought impossible. The prophet began to fade, returning to whatever dimension it came from. We did not warn you that humans were dangerous because they would destroy you. We warned you because they would save you, and you would hate them for it before you learned to thank them. The prophet disappeared, leaving Mordok alone with his thoughts. 10 years later, Commander Thek sat in the same office where he had once compiled incident reports about human behavior. His walls were covered with new reports. Humans had discovered 15 new habitable worlds. Human-designed ships were now standard in 3 sectors. Human combat tactics were taught at every military academy. Human restaurants existed on every major station. Most remarkable were the cultural reports. The Crixian Collective had started an innovation initiative encouraging creative problem-solving. The Thanix Republic had reformed its military training to include flexibility and initiative. The Quellan Harmony had established an exploration division for the first time in 10,000 years. Even the Khazar Dominion had been affected. They had requested a diplomatic exchange program with humans. Their stated reason was to understand the enemy. Thek suspected they were really trying to learn how humans thought so they could think that way too. A young officer entered his office. She was Zenthari like him, but she wore her uniform differently, more casual, more confident. She had trained under a human officer for 2 years. "Sir, we have another incident report," she said with a smile. "A human cargo captain has established a regular trade route through the Maelstrom cluster. She's cutting transport times by 40%. "That's impossible," Thek said automatically. "The Maelstrom has chaotic gravity wells. No one can navigate it safely." The human captain says she grew up sailing boats on Earth's oceans. She treats the gravity wells like wind currents. The young officer shrugged. "It makes no sense, but it works. 3 other captains are already trying to copy her route." Thek sighed and smiled at the same time. "File it under standard human behavior and move on." After the officer left, Thex looked out his window at the station beyond. Ships of every design flying in patterns that would have seemed chaotic 20 years ago, but now looked normal. Aliens wearing human clothing. Restaurants serving food from a dozen worlds. Children playing games from Earth. The galaxy was becoming more human every day. Not because humans forced change, but because their way of thinking was contagious. They showed the galaxy that rules were meant to be questioned, that danger was meant to be faced, that the impossible was just something no one had accomplished yet. The Vidians had been right. Humanity was inevitable, and maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. On a distant colony world, a young alien child asked her teacher why the sky was blue. The human teacher smiled and said, "That's a great question. Why don't we build the experiment and find out?" The child's eyes lit up with excitement. She would spend the rest of her life asking questions and finding answers. She would become an explorer, discovering things no one had seen before. She would be brave, curious, and persistent. She would be human in all the ways that mattered. And across the galaxy, in a million small moments just like this one, the future was being written, not by force or conquest, but by inspiration and example. The galaxy had been warned, and the warning had come true. Humanity had changed everything. And that was exactly what everyone needed, even if it took them years to realize it.